I still remember the moment everything began to unravel. My wife, Megan, had left for a week-long business trip, something she often did. It wasn't unusual for her to travel, but this time felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it. She'd been more distant than usual before she left, brushing off my attempts at affection with curt responses about being busy. I shrugged it off, assuming the stress of her job was getting to her again. I had no idea what storm was brewing. On the third evening of her trip, I sat down to check my emails and review our joint bank account. A few routine payments caught my eye: dinner reservations, hotel stays, shopping sprees. But there was a glaring issue. None of them were purchases we discussed, and none of them included me. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. Maybe Megan had forgotten to mention something. But when I saw the names of the stores, high-end boutiques I couldn't imagine her shopping at, and the receipts for men's cologne and tailored suits, my stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. Hundreds, then thousands, of dollars were disappearing from our account, all signed off with her name. I texted her immediately. "Hey, just saw some charges on the card. Are these work-related? Let me know." I tried to keep it casual, but my fingers were trembling as I sent the message. Minutes passed, then an hour. No reply. I called her phone. It rang until it went to voicemail. By the time midnight rolled around, I wasn't just confused. I was angry. I logged into our account again and dug deeper. Each transaction was linked to places I'd never heard of: upscale bars, luxury gift shops, and a boutique spa in the city where she was supposed to be working. A pattern began to emerge, and it wasn't flattering. Before I could second-guess myself, I did something I never thought I'd have to do in my marriage. I froze the card. That night, sleep didn't come. I sat awake, staring at the ceiling, questions swirling in my mind. Why would Megan spend this kind of money? Who were the gifts for? And more importantly, what was she hiding? The next morning, I decided I needed answers. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to discover. The next day began in a haze. I woke up to an empty bed and the weight of a decision that I wasn't sure I was ready to make. The messages I'd sent Megan the night before still had no replies, which only deepened the pit in my stomach. Was she ignoring me, or was there something else going on? I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to focus, but my mind was in a free fall. Every worst-case scenario clawed its way to the surface. Was she in trouble? Was she lying to me? Or, worse yet, was there someone else? By mid-morning, I decided to call her office. I needed to hear her voice, if only to calm the growing storm in my chest. "Good morning," the receptionist answered. "This is Danielle. How can I help you?" "Hi, Danielle. This is Ethan, Megan's husband. I was just wondering if I could speak with her. She's on a business trip, but she's not answering her phone, and I'm starting to get a little worried." There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. Danielle began hesitantly. "Megan doesn't have any trips on her calendar for this week." My grip on the phone tightened. "Are you sure?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Yes, I'm sure," she replied. "She's actually scheduled to work remotely for the next few days. Is everything okay?" I barely managed to thank her before ending the call. My hands shook as I set the phone down on the kitchen counter. She lied to me. Megan had lied about her trip. I couldn't sit there anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove, not knowing exactly where I was going but needing to clear my head. The thought that she was somewhere else, doing who knows what, made me feel sick. Halfway across town, I stopped at a small diner we used to visit when we first started dating. It was empty, the booths worn and familiar, but I could barely bring myself to look at the menu. Memories of us sitting there, laughing over shared plates of pancakes, now felt like a cruel joke. I called her again. This time, she answered. "Ethan," she said, her tone chipper, almost rehearsed. "Hey, I'm so sorry I didn't call you back last night. It's been crazy here." I clenched my teeth, doing my best to sound normal. "No problem," I said evenly. "I just wanted to check in. How's the trip going?" "Oh, she replied breezily. "Meetings, networking, the usual. I'm just about to head into another session. Can I call you later?" I swallowed hard. "Sure," I said, my voice cracking. She hung up before I could say anything else. My hands trembled as I stared at my phone. It was all lies. I could hear it in her voice now, the forced casualness, the rush to get off the line. I went home and logged back into our joint account, my stomach turning as I dug further into the transactions. One of them stood out, a charge for a suite at a luxury hotel downtown. My jaw tightened. That wasn't part of her business trip. I grabbed my coat and drove straight to the hotel. The lobby was beautiful, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. But I didn't care about any of that. My eyes were fixed on the front desk, where a young woman with a bright smile greeted me. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" I took a deep breath, forcing my expression into something close to polite. "Hi, I'm Ethan Carter. My wife, Megan, is staying here, but I've been unable to reach her. Could you confirm her room number for me?" She hesitated, her smile faltering slightly. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out that information." "Please," I said, my voice softening. "I just want to surprise her. We've been married 10 years, and I thought I'd do something special." The woman's expression softened. "That's sweet," she said. "Let me check." She typed something into her computer, then looked up at me with a faint smile. "Yes, Megan Carter is staying here in Suite 514. I thanked her and headed for the elevator, my heart pounding. When I reached the 5th floor, the hallway stretched before me, each step echoing loudly in my ears. I stood outside the door to her suite, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, to cling to some shred of ignorance. But the other part, the part that already knew the truth, pushed me forward. I knocked. There was a pause, and then the door creaked open. Megan stood there, her face pale as she saw me. "Ethan," she stammered, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said coldly, stepping inside. The suite was lavish, and the smell of expensive cologne hung faintly in the air. My eyes immediately went to the rumpled bed and the suit jacket draped over the chair. It wasn't mine. Before I could say anything, a man emerged from the bathroom, buttoning his shirt. He froze when he saw me. Megan's voice broke the silence. "Ethan, this isn't what it looks like." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "It's exactly what it looks like." The man, tall, well-dressed, and smug, stepped forward, holding out a hand as if this were some casual meeting. "I'm Andrew," he said. I stared at him, my fists clenched at my sides. "Get out," I said through gritted teeth. Andrew hesitated, looking at Megan for direction. "Go," she said quietly, her voice trembling. He grabbed his things and left without another word, leaving me alone with her. Megan started to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said. "Don't even try to explain." Tears welled in her eyes. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I snapped. "You're sorry? You lied to me. You used our money to buy gifts for him. You cheated on me. How long, Megan? How long has this been going on?" She looked away, her silence answering the question for her. I let out a bitter laugh. "Unbelievable," I said. "I trusted you. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." She started to cry, but I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy. "You can keep this suite," I said, heading for the door. "I'm done." "Ethan, wait," she pleaded, reaching for me. I turned back, my eyes cold. "We're done, Megan. I'll send the papers." As I walked away, the weight on my chest lifted ever so slightly. The pain was still there, raw and searing, but so was a new feeling, resolve. This wasn't over yet. Leaving that hotel suite was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every step away from that door felt like I was walking through fire, but I refused to let Megan or her betrayal burn me any further. When I reached the car, I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the steering wheel and trying to make sense of everything. The anger came first, a hot, suffocating rage that made my chest tighten. How could she do this? After everything we'd been through, how could she throw it all away for someone like him? And then came the questions. Was it my fault? Had I missed the signs? Had I somehow pushed her into this? But as I sat there, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about Megan's betrayal. It was about what came next. I had choices to make, and I wasn't going to let her or Andrew decide how this story ended. I drove home in a daze, the weight of what I'd seen pressing down on me. The house felt colder and emptier than ever when I walked in, and for a moment, I stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do. But then my eyes landed on the wedding photo hanging on the wall. Megan and I, smiling on a beach in Maui, young and hopeful. I wanted to tear it down, but I stopped myself. Not yet. Instead, I grabbed a notebook from my desk and sat down at the kitchen table. I needed a plan. First, the finances. Megan had been reckless, but I wasn't about to let her take me down with her. I logged into our joint account and printed out every transaction she'd made in the last 3 months. There were dinners, gifts, hotel stays, and even a lease agreement for a second apartment I hadn't known about. My jaw tightened as I stared at the numbers, each one a reminder of her deceit. I called the bank and froze the account completely, explaining that I'd noticed unauthorized activity. The representative was sympathetic, but her polite tone didn't do much to ease the sting of humiliation. Once that was done, I opened a separate account in my name only. Whatever money I had left, I'd protect. Megan could fend for herself. Next came the legal side. I wasn't going to jump straight to divorce, at least, not yet. I wanted to make sure that when I did, it would be on my terms. That meant gathering evidence. I spent the rest of the evening combing through emails, texts, and social media. Megan had been careful, but not careful enough. There were messages from Andrew, flirty, suggestive, and damning. I took screenshots of everything, saving them in a folder labeled Documentation. By midnight, I was exhausted but resolute. This wasn't just about ending my marriage. It was about making sure Megan understood the full weight of what she'd done. The next morning, I called a divorce lawyer. Her name was Linda Hart, and she came highly recommended by a friend who'd gone through a messy separation. Linda listened patiently as I explained the situation, her voice calm but firm when she spoke. "You've already taken some smart steps," she said, her tone professional. "Freezing the account was a good move. Now, we need to focus on protecting your assets and building a case." "What about the house?" I asked. "It's in both our names." Linda hesitated. "That depends on a few factors: who paid for it, how long you've owned it, and whether there's a prenup." "There's no prenup," I admitted, regretting it instantly. "Okay," she said. "We'll deal with that. But you need to start thinking about what you want. Are you looking to sell the house and split the proceeds, or do you want to keep it?" "I'm not giving it up," I said firmly. "I built that home. It's mine." Linda agreed to start drafting the paperwork and advised me to keep gathering evidence. She also suggested hiring a private investigator to ensure we had a clear picture of Megan's activities. It felt invasive, but at this point, I wasn't taking any chances. When I hung up, I felt a small flicker of control returning. That evening, I drove to Megan's parents' house. I didn't want to involve them, but I needed them to hear the truth from me, not her. Her father, George, answered the door, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Ethan," he said warmly, "what brings you by? Can we talk?" I asked, my voice strained. He frowned but invited me in, leading me to the living room where her mother, Carol, sat knitting. When she looked up and saw my face, her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting her needles down. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told them everything: Megan's lies, her affair, the money she'd spent, and the hotel suite. Carol gasped, tears welling in her eyes, while George sat in stunned silence. "She told us she was on a business trip," Carol whispered. "She lied," I said simply. George leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "I don't know what to say, Ethan. This isn't the daughter we raised." "I just thought you should know," I said. "I'm filing for divorce, and I wanted to make sure you heard it from me first." Carol reached out, her hand trembling as she placed it on mine. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. You deserve better." Her words were kind, but they didn't erase the pain. When I left, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Megan's parents had always treated me like family, and now I wondered if that bond would survive the fallout. The next few days were a blur of meetings with lawyers, late-night phone calls with the private investigator, and restless nights spent staring at the ceiling. I avoided Megan's calls and texts, letting her wonder what was coming. Then, on Friday evening, she showed up at the house. I heard her car pull into the driveway, followed by the sound of her keys jingling. I didn't answer the door. "Ethan," she called, her voice trembling. "Please, let me in." I stayed silent. "I know I messed up," she continued, her tone desperate, "but we can fix this. I love you." Her words, once a comfort, now felt hollow. Finally, I opened the door, staring at her without a word. "Can we talk?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "Talk?" I repeated, my voice cold. "What's there to talk about, Megan? You made your choices. Now you can live with them." She broke down, but I didn't offer her comfort. Instead, I handed her an envelope, the divorce papers Linda had prepared. Her eyes widened as she took it, her hands trembling. "You can't mean this," she whispered. "I do," I said firmly. "You wanted something new? Now you have it. I hope it was worth it." She sobbed, but I didn't waver. This was the first step toward reclaiming my life. I watched as Megan clutched the envelope, her sobs tearing through the silence of the entryway. For a moment, I thought she might drop it, but she didn't. Instead, she sank down onto the bench near the door, her head bowed as if the weight of her actions had finally hit her. "Ethan, please," she whispered, her voice choked. "You can't do this. We've been through so much together. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall, keeping my face impassive. "It meant everything to me," I said evenly. "But apparently, it didn't mean much to you." Her tear-streaked face snapped up to meet mine. "That's not fair," she cried. "I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I cut her off, my voice sharp. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or buying the wrong kind of milk. What you did wasn't a mistake, Megan. It was a choice. A deliberate, selfish choice. And you didn't make it once. You made it over and over again." She flinched as if I'd slapped her, but I didn't care. I was done cushioning her feelings. "You don't understand," she said, her tone growing defensive. "I was lonely, Ethan. You were always so busy with work, so distant. I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Don't try to pin this on me, Megan. I might not be perfect, but I was here. I was faithful. I didn't turn to someone else the moment things got tough." Her face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands, sobbing harder. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay. But the pain and anger bubbling inside me kept me rooted where I stood. After a long moment, she looked up at me, her eyes red and pleading. "Ethan, I love you. I do. What I did, it doesn't mean I don't love you." I scoffed, pushing off the wall. "Do you even hear yourself? You don't cheat on someone you love, Megan. Love is loyalty. It's respect. It's choosing someone every single day, even when it's hard. What you feel isn't love, it's convenience. And when I wasn't convenient enough, you found someone else who was." Her sobs quieted, replaced by a heavy silence. She stared at the floor, her shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. "I never wanted to hurt you," she murmured. "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "You succeeded anyway." For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The house felt unbearably quiet, the tension thick enough to choke on. Finally, Megan broke the silence. "What happens now?" she asked softly. I walked over to the door and opened it, gesturing for her to leave. "What happens now is simple," I said. "You take your things, and you go. The papers are in your hands. You can read them, sign them, and send them back. After that, you're on your own." She looked up at me, a fresh wave of tears streaming down her face. "You can't just throw me out," she said, her voice trembling. "Watch me," I replied. She didn't move at first, as if hoping I'd change my mind. But when I didn't, she stood slowly, clutching the envelope to her chest. "I'll stay at a hotel," she mumbled. Just for a few days. Take all the time you need," I said. "But don't expect to come back here." She hesitated at the door, looking back at me one last time. Her eyes searched mine, but I didn't give her anything. No softness, no forgiveness, just the cold, hard truth. When she finally stepped outside and closed the door behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The house felt eerily quiet without her, But for the first time in days, I didn't feel suffocated. I spent the next few hours gathering up her things. Clothes, toiletries, jewelry, everything that reminded me of her went into a box. I couldn't stand to see any of it anymore. When the box was full, I left it by the front door, ready for her to pick up whenever she wanted. That night, I poured myself a stiff drink and sat on the couch, staring at the wedding photo still hanging on the wall. I thought about taking it down, but something stopped me. Maybe it was a reminder of what once was, or maybe it was a reminder of how far I'd come since then. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, images of Megan and Andrew flooded my mind. Her laughter, his smirk, the sound of her voice saying, "It doesn't mean I don't love you." By morning, I knew what I had to do. I called Linda, my lawyer, and told her to proceed with the divorce. She assured me we had a solid case, especially with the evidence I'd gathered. "Once the papers are served, we'll negotiate the terms," Linda said. "Given the circumstances, you're in a strong position to keep the house and most of the assets." "That's all I want," I said. "I don't care about revenge. I just want to move on." Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, spent time with friends I hadn't seen in years, and even started going to the gym again. It wasn't easy. Every step forward felt like dragging myself through quicksand, but I refused to let Megan's betrayal define me. Occasionally, I'd get a text or email from her. They were always the same. Apologies, pleas for another chance, promises that she'd change. I ignored them all. Then, one day, I came home to find her car in the driveway. My heart sank as I pulled in behind her. She was sitting on the front steps, holding the box of her things I'd packed weeks ago. When she saw me, she stood, looking nervous and unsure. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice cold. "I wanted to talk," she said, "face to face. One last time." I sighed, unlocking the door and stepping inside. She followed me in, clutching the box like a lifeline. "I've signed the papers," she said quietly, "but I need you to know something before this is over." I turned to face her, crossing my arms. What could you possibly say that would change anything? She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "I know I messed up, Ethan, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. I don't expect you to take me back, but I needed to tell you that before I go." Her words hung in the air, heavy and sincere. For the first time, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. But it wasn't enough. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "But sorry doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't undo the lies, the betrayal, or the pain. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Megan. But it won't be with me." Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded. Without another word, she turned and walked out the door, leaving the box behind. When the door clicked shut, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. This was the end, but it was also a new beginning. The day Megan left for good, I stood by the window, watching her car disappear down the street. For a long time, I just stood there, unsure of what I was supposed to feel. Relief? Sadness? Maybe a bit of both. The house felt empty in a way that was both freeing and suffocating, like standing in a room with all the air sucked out of it. It wasn't until I turned back toward the living room that the weight of it all hit me. This was my house now, mine alone. The reminders of her betrayal were still scattered everywhere, from the photos on the walls to the faint scent of her perfume clinging to the couch cushions. I couldn't live like this. The first thing I did was grab every picture of us together and shove them into a box. It wasn't anger driving me, more like survival. Seeing her face smiling back at me from every corner of the house felt like reopening a wound I was trying desperately to heal. Once the box was full, I taped it shut and shoved it into the back of the closet. With the photos gone, the walls looked bare, and that emptiness stirred something in me. I didn't just want to remove the reminders of her. I wanted to reclaim this space, to make it my own. The next morning, I woke up early, grabbed a can of paint from the hardware store, and spent the day covering the walls in a fresh coat of light gray. It wasn't a drastic change, but it felt like wiping the slate clean. As the brush moved up and down, I found myself focusing on the rhythm of it, the steady back and forth. It was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. But repainting the walls was just the beginning. I started tackling projects I'd been putting off for years, projects that had always taken a back seat to Megan's priorities or the endless busyness of life. I replaced the leaky faucet in the kitchen, fixed the squeaky floorboard in the hallway, and built a new bookshelf for the study. Each completed task felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming my life. The house wasn't the only thing that needed rebuilding. My social life had taken a hit during my marriage. Over the years, I drifted away from friends, prioritizing work and Megan over everything else. Now, with all this newfound time on my hands, I decided to reach out to people I hadn't spoken to in ages. One of the first calls I made was to my best friend, Mark. We hadn't talked much since his wedding 2 years ago, but when I told him what had happened, he didn't hesitate. "Come over," he said. "We'll fire up the grill and catch up." That evening, sitting on his back patio with a beer in hand, I felt a sense of camaraderie I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Mark listened without judgment as I recounted everything. Megan's lies, her betrayal, the divorce. "You've been through hell, man," he said, shaking his head, "but you're handling it better than most would." "Doesn't feel that way," I admitted. "Some days, I don't even know what I'm doing." "That's normal," he said. "It's like rebuilding after a storm. It takes time, but eventually, you get there." His words stuck with me as the weeks went by. Rebuilding wasn't easy. It came with setbacks and moments of doubt, but little by little, I started to feel like myself again. I also threw myself into work. It wasn't just a distraction. It was a way to regain control. My job as a project manager had always been demanding, but now it felt like a lifeline. I stayed late at the office, tackled new challenges, and even took on a leadership role in a major project. My colleagues noticed the change, and one day, my boss pulled me aside. "You've been killing it lately," she said. "If you keep this up, I see a promotion in your future." It was the first time in months that I felt like something good was on the horizon. But even with work and friends keeping me busy, the nights were hard. The silence of the house felt heavier after the sun went down, and the memories of Megan's betrayal had a way of creeping in when I least expected it. I tried everything to keep my mind occupied. Reading, working out, even watching movies I'd never cared for before. But no matter what I did, there were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again. One of those nights, I found myself scrolling aimlessly through my phone. Without really thinking, I opened the dating app a friend had recommended a few weeks earlier. I downloaded it out of curiosity but hadn't done much with it. Now, in the middle of the night, I figured, why not? Creating a profile felt strange, like stepping into a world I didn't quite belong in, but it was also oddly exciting. I filled out the basics, uploaded a picture, and within minutes, matches started rolling in. Most of the conversations were light and casual, but one stood out. Her name was Olivia, and her profile mentioned a love of hiking and photography, two things I'd always enjoyed but hadn't done much of recently. Our first conversation was easy, full of jokes and shared interests. By the end of the week, we'd set a date to meet for coffee. I was nervous when I walked into the cafe, unsure if I was ready for this, but Olivia put me at ease immediately. She was funny, down-to-earth, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. Over the next few weeks, we went on more dates, hiking trails, exploring local markets, and even attending a photography exhibit downtown. Being with her felt different, lighter. She wasn't trying to fix me or rush me into anything. She was just there, a steady presence in a time of uncertainty. As the months went by, my life began to take shape in ways I hadn't expected. The house was finally finished, work was thriving, and my relationship with Olivia grew stronger every day. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "You've come a long way, Ethan. You should be proud of yourself." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't anticipated. She was right. I'd been so focused on moving forward that I hadn't stopped to look at how far I'd come. That night, I took down the wedding photo I'd left hanging in the living room. It wasn't an act of anger or bitterness, just closure. I replaced it with a new photo, one I'd taken during a hike with Olivia. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life I was proud to call my own. Months had passed since Megan walked out of my life, And while her betrayal still lingered in the shadows of my mind, I had started to reclaim pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. Life was moving forward, slowly but surely. One chilly autumn morning, as I sipped coffee on the porch of my newly renovated home, I noticed a familiar car pulling into the driveway. It was Megan's, a car I hadn't seen since the day she left. My stomach twisted in knots. She stepped out, looking hesitant, clutching a small brown box. She had always been confident, someone who carried herself with certainty, but now she seemed smaller, unsure. I stayed seated, keeping my expression unreadable as she approached. "Ethan," she began softly, her breath visible in the crisp air. "I'm sorry for showing up unannounced." "What do you want, Megan?" I asked, my voice even. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the box. "I came to bring this. It's yours." I set my coffee mug down and stood, taking the box from her hands. It wasn't heavy, but the weight of the moment felt crushing. I opened it to find things I'd forgotten about: a watch I'd left at her parents' house, a book I'd lent her years ago, and at the very bottom, my wedding ring. My chest tightened. "Why now?" She looked away, her shoulders slumping. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Ethan, about everything, and I realized I can't hold on to these anymore. They belong to you." Her voice trembled, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the woman I used to love, the one who had promised me forever. But then, like a flicker of light extinguished by the truth, that image disappeared. "Thanks," I said simply, closing the box and placing it on the porch railing. Megan fidgeted with the hem of her coat. "I've signed the final papers. Linda said you'd get them by the end of the week." I nodded. "Good." She glanced up at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe, or guilt. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Ethan, for everything. You didn't deserve what I did to you." The apology hung in the air between us, but it didn't spark any warmth or relief. "I know I didn't," I said, my tone firm but not unkind. "But I've moved on, Megan, and you should too." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she nodded. "I hope you're happy," she said quietly before turning and walking back to her car. I watched as she drove away, the sight of her fading into the distance. When I looked back at the box on the railing, I felt a strange sense of finality. This was closure. Not the dramatic kind I had imagined, but the quiet kind that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. Later that evening, as I sat by the fireplace flipping through an old photo album, Olivia walked in carrying 2 glasses of wine. "What's this?" she asked, setting the glasses down and peering over my shoulder. "Just going through some old memories," I replied, my voice tinged with nostalgia. She sat beside me, her warmth radiating in the firelight. "You okay?" I nodded, smiling softly. "Yeah. For the first time in a long time, I think I really am." We spent the next hour flipping through the pages together. Olivia didn't press me for details or dwell on the past. Instead, she listened, offering gentle encouragement whenever I needed it. As the evening wore on, I realized how different things felt with her. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells, just an easy comfort that reminded me what relationships were supposed to be like. In the weeks that followed, life continued to blossom. Work was going better than ever, and the promotion Linda had mentioned became a reality. My new role came with more responsibilities, but also more opportunities to lead and grow. It felt good to be recognized for my hard work, especially after everything I'd been through. Olivia and I grew closer, too. We spent weekends exploring new hiking trails, cooking elaborate dinners, and laughing over the smallest things. She brought out a lighter side of me, one I hadn't seen in years. One afternoon, we drove up to a scenic overlook just as the sun was setting. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and the view took my breath away. "This is beautiful," Olivia said, snapping a photo with her camera. "It is," I agreed, though my eyes were on her. She turned to me, catching my gaze, and smiled. "What?" "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." Her smile widened, and she reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. In moments like that, I felt the scars from my past healing little by little. Megan's betrayal had left deep wounds, But Olivia's kindness and understanding were like a balm, soothing the pain and reminding me that life could still be good. One evening, as we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, Olivia asked a question that took me by surprise. "Do you ever think about what's next?" I glanced at her, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" "For us," she clarified, her voice soft but steady. "Do you think about the future?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to make sure she understood how much she meant to me. "All the time," I said finally. "And for the first time in a long time, the future doesn't scare me." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. It was true. The future no longer felt like an uncertain void. Instead, it felt like a canvas, waiting to be filled with new memories and possibilities. As the weeks turned into months, I made peace with my past. Megan's chapter in my life had come to a definitive end, and while it hadn't been the ending I'd envisioned, it had taught me valuable lessons about resilience, trust, and self-worth. One day, as I stood in my backyard watching the sunrise, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the pain or betrayal, but for the growth that had come from it. I was stronger, wiser, and more in tune with who I was and what I wanted. Olivia joined me outside, her hair tousled from sleep, and slipped her hand into mine. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm and full of promise. "Good morning," I replied, pulling her close. In that moment, with the sun casting its golden light over the horizon, I realized something important. Life doesn't always go according to plan, but sometimes the unexpected paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. The day I officially finalized my divorce from Megan, I felt an odd mix of emotions. Relief was the strongest, but there was also a lingering sadness for what could have been, for the life we had imagined together before everything fell apart. I'd spent so long feeling stuck in the past that stepping into a future without her felt surreal, like walking through a door and realizing the room beyond is brighter than you'd expected. Olivia stayed by my side throughout the process. She didn't push or pry. She just listened when I needed her to and distracted me when I didn't want to think about it. After we left the courthouse, she suggested we go to the small cafe where we'd had our first date. "I think we should celebrate," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Celebrate what?" I asked with a half-smile. "Your new beginning," she replied, squeezing my hand. As we sat there sipping coffee and sharing a slice of pie, I realized how far I'd come. The pain of Megan's betrayal still lingered in the background, but it no longer consumed me. I was learning to trust again, to hope again. That evening, I took Olivia to my favorite hiking spot, a secluded trail that ended at a stunning overlook. It had always been my go-to place for thinking, and I wanted to share it with her. "This is beautiful," she said as we reached the top, the view of the valley stretching out before us. "Yeah," I agreed, though I couldn't take my eyes off her. She turned to me, her smile soft and knowing. "What's on your mind?" "Just how grateful I am," I said. "For you, for this moment, for everything." Her eyes glistened, and she leaned in to kiss me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The next few months were a whirlwind of growth and change. My promotion at work brought new challenges, but I tackled them head-on, determined to prove to myself and others that I was capable of thriving despite everything I'd been through. Olivia continued to be my rock, encouraging me to pursue my goals and cheering me on every step of the way. She had a way of grounding me, reminding me to slow down and enjoy the little moments. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, she brought up an idea that had been on her mind. "Have you ever thought about mentoring someone?" she asked. "Mentoring?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," she said. "You've been through so much, and you've come out stronger. I think your story could help someone else who's struggling." The idea intrigued me. I'd always believed in paying it forward, and if sharing my experiences could make someone else's journey easier, I was all for it. That week, I reached out to a local support group for people going through divorce. They were happy to have me come in as a guest speaker, and before I knew it, I was standing in front of a room full of strangers, sharing my story. It was nerve-wracking at first, but as I looked around the room and saw the understanding in their faces, I realized how powerful it was to connect with others who had been through similar struggles. By the end of the evening, I felt a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. One evening, as Olivia and I were sitting on the porch, my phone buzzed with a text message. Seeing Megan's name on the screen sent a jolt through me. "Can we meet? I need to talk to you." I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I showed the message to Olivia, who gave me a reassuring nod. "If you think it'll bring you closure, go," she said. I met Megan at a park the next day. She looked different, tired, like the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. "I don't know why I'm here," she admitted, sitting on the bench beside me. "I guess I just needed to say goodbye properly." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, "about everything I did, everything I lost. And I wanted you to know how sorry I am. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to tell you." Her words were sincere, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. "I forgive you," I said finally. "Not for you, but for me. Holding on to the anger doesn't help anyone." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Ethan. I hope you find happiness." "I already have," I replied. Olivia and I continued to grow closer, and eventually, we began talking about taking the next step. "Do you ever think about us living together?" she asked one evening as we watched the sunset. "Every day," I admitted. It didn't take long for us to merge our lives. She moved into my house, bringing her warmth and laughter with her. The house that had once felt cold and empty was now full of life again. Olivia and I decided to take a trip to the mountains, a place we both loved. It was during that trip, as we sat by a roaring fire under a blanket of stars, that I realized just how much she meant to me. I proposed to Olivia in the same spot where I'd first told her I was grateful for her. She said yes, tears streaming down her face as we embraced. Our wedding was small and intimate, surrounded by close friends and family. It was a day filled with laughter, love, and hope for the future. Looking back, I realized how much I had grown from my experiences. Megan's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also pushed me to rediscover myself, to rebuild my life in ways I never imagined. Years later, as Olivia and I watched our children play in the backyard, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Life hadn't gone according to plan, but it had led me here, to a place of love, strength, and peace. Sometimes, the path we least expect leads us exactly where we're meant to be.